Every time I see a clock that features Nixie tubes, I think, wow, that is super cool. And whenever I see a watch also featuring these same Nixie tubes, I think, wow, that's very, very cool. But the problem with them is that they are rather large, those Nixie tubes, meaning that the watch has to be rather large. And although I would actually then still love to own one, love to have one in my collection, I'm not entirely sure how often I would actually wear it because it is, well, a little bit too big for my wrist, which is why I think NIWA has developed a watch that has that same sort of feel and sort of technology, yet is a much more wearable size. Hello, you're watching James. My name's James, you're watching me, and I am talking about watches. And today I'm talking about a watch which I think you could describe as vintage retro, or you could possibly call it industrial, or even steampunk. But when I look at this watch, well, firstly I think, wow, that's just cool. But I also think, wow, that's also fun. And I've realized over the past few years of watch collecting how important it is for me to have a fun watch in my collection. But I've realized over the few years of collecting these fun watches that I also like a watch that is detailed and well made and fun. A watch that I put on and I appreciate the quality of it, but I also look down at it and I think, that's very, very cool. And I think this watch from NIWA ticks all those boxes that I'm looking for in regards to fun, well made, and certainly detailed. This is a watch that not only grabs my attention initially, but it holds my attention because there's so many things to see, so many things to dive into, and I find myself constantly bringing out my loupe so I can dive deeper using that sort of higher magnification to see all the details within this watch. And as I've been wearing this watch and enjoying this watch, it's been in the back of my mind of how to formulate and put together this video that I'm making right now. And there's two things that I realized fairly quickly. Firstly, I was going to be putting in some footage and some description about how to set the time on this watch, but I don't think I'm going to be very good at doing that. I think I'll make a little bit of a mess of it, and I've decided that I'm not going to do that. I'll put some sort of instructions on a little bit of how you do set the time, but I'm not going to make this an instructional video. There's a great video by the company that does that much better than I can. Secondly, I was also going to dive into the technology of the tubes and how they work and how the electricity goes through them and how it lights up, but I've realized that I'm also not going to be very good at doing that. And as I was sort of researching this watch, I came across a video from Andrew Morgan who just does that really, really well, much better than I could. So I think you're better off watching his video about the technology behind this specific watch. Now, I'm going to leave links to both of those videos, the instructions as well as that Andrew Morgan video, because he does it so much better than I can. But what I can do, and what I've been thinking about as I've been wearing this watch and trying to put together my ideas of how I'm going to put this video together, is I'm going to concentrate on this watch in front of me. I'm going to dive into it, show you all the details, all the things that possibly may not jump out to you straight away if you're just looking at the website or if you're looking at photos of this watch. And if you do consider buying one of these, well, there's about 6 different variations. If you look on their website, you can see there's 6 different types. There is a black version, which has an all black case. There's a raw titanium finish, a moon grey, this sort of rainbow oil slick style. There's a limited edition blue version. And then there is what I'm going to consider is a sort of purple case, or a heat treated purple case, which is the one that I'm going to share with you today. And if you're going to be buying them, they do vary a little bit in price depending on the option that you choose, because they range between $460 US through to $535 US. And although I didn't actually have to pay that, because NIWA reached out to me and said, hey, we'd love to get some more presence for this watch on YouTube. Would you like to feature one? And as soon as I saw the picture of the watch that they were talking about, I put my hand up and said, yes, please, I'd love to have this one in my collection. So they did send this one out to me. So that's why you would have seen that sponsored icon pop up there. And on top of those two videos, links I'm going to put in the description, I'm also going to put a link directly to their website. But let's get some of the basics about this watch out of the way first, so I can then dive into all these amazing details that this one has. All of them are a titanium case. They all have sapphire crystals. It has a rechargeable battery that they say roughly takes about 3 hours to charge, but then lasts for around about 10 days. Now there is a power management system inbuilt within this watch, and it has some more details on the website about that. But there's something about a standby mode that allows it to then last much longer than those 10 days. Now they don't specify the water resistance of this watch. They do say, however, that probably you shouldn't take it close to much water because it is only just splash resistant. This is not a watch that I'm going to be taking swimming. But something that does stand out to me when I've seen watches like this in the past is my concerns about the sizing. And obviously NIWA had the same concern because they wanted a much wearable option for this style of watch. And this one is definitely a wearable size because the case itself is 42 millimeters and it's almost a perfect circle, except for it has some small little lugs which pushes the lug to lug out to 45.7 millimeters. The height of the watch is 12.4 millimeters. The lug width is 20 millimeters and it only weighs 47 grams, which means when you put it on wrist, not only does that size fit my 17 centimeter wrist really well, but because it is so light, it almost disappears onto my wrist. But now that you know that this one is actually going to fit your wrist, or at least a medium wrist like mine, you probably then want to dive into seeing what is the specific details of this watch. Why are you really buying this? Because you're not buying it specifically for that case shape, you're buying it for what is under that sapphire crystal. Because as you look at this watch, there's a lot to see. Basically, if you look on the far right, there is a long tube, which is your power indicator. In the middle of the watch, there's a series of overlapping tubes, which consists of how you tell the time. On the left, there's some more overlapping tubes, which then help sort of even out the inside of that dial too, but they also are part of telling the time. But how do you tell the time on this watch? And how do you set the time on this watch? Now, I'm not going to go into those specific details about setting it, but let me just say it is easy to set, but it's interesting to set because there's no buttons on this watch. In fact, what you use to set the time, to set the functionality of this watch, is a magnet that comes with the package. Effectively, if you tap the magnet to the right-hand side of the case, that's your mode button, and if you tap the magnet to the left side of the case, it is a set button. You can switch this one between 12 and 24 hours, and then when you have it set to what you like, including also the angle of which you would like the watch to turn on, because that's how you activate to be able to tell what the time is. Otherwise, it's sitting in more standby mode. You can then have a look and see that it will flash 3 separate times. The first time it flashes, it's showing you the hours. The second time it flashes, it's showing you the minutes. And then the third is the seconds. It then holds on and then flashes and shows you the counting seconds on the watch. So sorry to interrupt. I know it is sometimes annoying when people jump in the middle of videos and ask you to subscribe, but that's exactly what I'm doing. So please, if you haven't done so already, could you please subscribe to the channel? Okay, let's get back to the video. And that's all great, but still, how do you tell the time on this watch? Well, if you look past those tubes down onto the actual dial of the watch, you'll see some Roman numerals that are alongside those tubes. And you use those to identify which number is being lit up. And then you have to do a little bit of math to identify what the time is. Initially, if you've got it in 12-hour mode, you'll see one of the sides on the smaller side on the left flash up, and on the right, you put those two together, utilizing those Roman numerals, and that's your hour. The same with the minutes. The row on the left shows you the tens of minutes, so 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 50 minutes, and on the right shows you the minute. So you can see that it is the tens of minutes, and then you add on the minute, And then the seconds are pretty obvious because it is running through those sort of flashes as it sort of ticks through the seconds. Does this mean that it is an easy watch to tell the time? Can you at a glance look at it and go, I know exactly what the time is? And well, no. It does get easier as you wear this watch. You get used to it. The first time I wore it, I had no idea what the time was. But then a few days later, as I've been wearing it, I start to get a much better sense of it. You get a sense of where those tubes are, what they correlate to, and you start being able to understand that actually you can tell the time, and it is very accurate too. But again, it's still, even after wearing it for some time, probably not the most legible watch in my collection, and I'm perfectly okay with that because I'm not buying or want this watch in my collection as the most legible. I don't need it to be. I've got plenty of watches in my collection that are legible. This one I've been wearing for different reasons, yet even though I say it's not the most legible watch, it actually is still easy to tell the time. You just got to take perhaps a little bit more effort to get used to it and then identify what the time is. Now, as I mentioned, there are these 3 rows of tubes that you can clearly see. Those hours and minutes sort of on the left are overlapped, and they're sort of concentrically sort of layered there so that they can flash and sort of identify what the time is. On that right is that longer spiraled power indicator, and that creates a lot of depth on the dial, which is quite surprising why this watch actually isn't actually taller, but I think it is that overlayering of these particular tubes. And that depth of the dial, the details of the dial, really capture my attention, and it really does make me want to look at this dial all the time at different angles. I want to activate it, see those tubes activating. And to be honest, I just love seeing that power reserve, that spirally sort of green blue that it is, and that sort of then offsets those orange tubes on the left. I think it looks good. Now, as I mentioned, it has those Roman numerals on the dial as you look past those tubes, and you'll also see a similar style and coloured name or logo down in the bottom left of the dial. Those are not hugely obvious when you just glance at the watch, which makes it a little bit harder to then look past to initially identify the time. But as I mentioned, you seem to get used to it. I will say, however, at this point, I'm surprised that they chose Roman numerals to be utilised on this watch. It does seem to sort of suit the style perhaps, and it does look good, but it adds an extra complexity to telling the time. If I had the choice, I probably would have chosen normal numerals just to take away that slight extra little bit of complexity. It's not a hard thing to do or learn. It's just an extra little layer when telling the time. And I could almost stop the video there because, well, it's the dial that really is the showstopper for this watch. But let's have a look at the rest of it, because there still is some other interesting factors that are worth considering, because you'll see there is a piece of flat sapphire crystal which then leans across to this interesting round case. And the case is not perfectly round because it does have those small lugs hanging out the edges of them, and I'm glad that they are relatively small because then they keep the overall size of this watch down, but they are sort of low down on the case and they are angular. And as you then look up onto the side of the case, you'll see that it dips in the center. It is an interesting shape, and it is an interesting texture too. This one sort of changes in color a little bit with that purple to that almost bronze. And because it is titanium, it has an almost raw titanium feel to it, and almost sort of like a satin or a matte finish to it. And as you turn the watch over, there's a little bit of a surprise, something that I probably wouldn't have expected, and I'm not quite sure how it fits in with the story of this watch, but you'll see there is a window, and within that window there is a piece of meteorite. You'll also see under that meteorite is the charging point. You can easily charge this watch with the included cord. You just snap it on, it attaches in a magnetic type way, and it charges the watch for you. You can see there's also a numbered edition. And as you look at the underside of the strap, you'll see that it has quick release spring bars, making it nice and easy to swap out this leather strap with a rather interesting mesh magnetic strap. Now, I haven't actually used the magnetic strap because I've actually really enjoyed the leather strap. It's very soft, it's very supple, and it's very comfortable. And it adds to this on-wrist feeling of almost not being there because it is so comfortable, because it is so light. I almost don't feel it on my wrist. So wearing this watch Well, it's a fun experience. It's a comfortable experience on wrist too, and it is a good size. And although I know a lot of people are going to leave comments like, how do you even tell the time? I can't even wear that watch because I wouldn't even know what the time is. Well, it is one of those sorts of watches that you get used to and you start to understand it the more you wear it, and it becomes easier to tell the time as you start to wear it more. But it's not perfect. There are a couple of things that I think, as I've been wearing this one, I would change if I had that opportunity. And it is firstly, those Roman numerals. I think I would just prefer normal numbers. It'd be a little bit easier to initially identify the time. I'd even possibly look at, can you put them on the underside of the crystal? And although that may make it easier to tell the time, possibly it might take away from the looks of this watch. So I'm not entirely sure about that one. And although the magnet to adjust the time and set the time is quite a cool feature, and because it is this style of watch, you're probably not then going to have to action those all that often, I'm still a little bit unsure if I'd actually still prefer perhaps buttons on this watch. I'm a little bit unclear about that too, because now that I have this set, well, I'm not having to reset it. I'd only have to do that occasionally if I need to adjust the time. So anything that I probably would have said I would like to change, it's one of those situations where I'm not actually sure if I would change it, or the changes that I'm recommending would make it better. It probably wouldn't. This seems like a very well thought out watch. You would have had to put a lot of time and energy to develop this watch. So there's a reasonable chance that all the decisions that have been made for very good reasons. And I'm so glad that I've had the opportunity to get hands-on and on-wrist experience with this watch, because it has been one of the probably highlights of 2025 for me so far. It's absolutely brilliant and fun. Thank you so much for watching. I do have a couple of other videos here that you might want to watch next.